Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, we're all about gadgets. First, when Google met Moto. $12.5 billion puts Motorola in the hands of the web giant and maybe, just maybe, gives it a real shot at breaking Apple's dominance. While Apple's busy trying to keep others at bay, this is Samsung's challenger to the iPad, and Apple's doing all it can to keep it off the shelves. Plus, in other news, Switzerland, not part of the Eurozone, but still affected by the continent's financial turmoil. So a big tech focus this week, not just the Google-Motorola deal and the Apple-Samsung clash, but as you saw, our own head-to-head competition between their devices. Let's start with the big tech buy-up, though, the deal which marries Google's increasingly popular Android mobile software with Motorola's years of experience in mobile hardware. Google is paying $12.5 billion for Motorola Mobility, a lot of money for a company whose phones have been a bit hit and miss, to be fair. But it can afford it. Google made $8.6 billion in profits last year and has a cash mountain of $39 billion, which it's dipping into for the deal. Motorola, on the flip side, though, isn't quite as healthy. It booked a loss of $86 million last year and has only $3 billion in reserves. However, it has no debts, and most importantly, 17,000 patents with another 7,500 pending. Those patents alone have been valued at about $6 billion. And that is where the deal really starts to make sense. Patents are worth a heck of a lot of money at the moment, and Google was outbid for about $4.5 billion worth of them by a group led by none other than Apple and Microsoft. So, in short, it's a tech war, and we're going to find out this week where those battle lines have been drawn. First up, Rosalind Jordan in Washington with a little more detail on that Google deal.
Google, the #1 search engine and the maker of the Android smartphone operating system. Now it wants to make smartphones. So it's buying Motorola Mobility, the smartphone maker, for $12.5 billion in cash.
Already today, more than 10% of all Google page views are happening on mobile devices. So they need to make sure that if you want to get to the internet and you have a smartphone, they want you going through their device and not just through Apple or Microsoft or others.
Analysts say there's another reason why Google is making its biggest acquisition ever. Motorola has patents, 17,000 of them, thousands more in the pipeline. Lawsuits involving intellectual property are a fact of life in the high-tech world. This deal could help Google protect itself. But it could also force more consolidation between cell phone makers and software providers.
If you're HTC or Samsung this morning, you wake up and you find out that Google is now a competitor to you, you most likely pick up that phone and you call Microsoft and you inquire about their Windows Phone 7 operating systems.
And that sort of consolidation could force smartphone prices up. A possible downside for the 5 billion smartphone users around the world, and potential reason why U.S. government regulators will look very carefully before approving the Google-Motorola deal.
So there's a lot of theories about the upsides and the downsides and the reasonings for this deal. We're going to explore some of them with Francisco Geronimo in London. He is Research Manager for Mobile Devices at the technology research group IDC. Francisco, thank you for your time. Motorola, very established mobile brand, one of the first major manufacturers, but you would not put it up there with the big smartphone players of today. So is Google doing the right thing buying it?
Yeah, you're right. It's a quite interesting move. What's basically happening is a strong consolidation on the market. So basically, Google is not buying Motorola because they need to have a brand on the smartphone business. They are buying Motorola because, as you said, Motorola is one of the first companies in the world who launched a mobile phone, and for that reason they have a strong and a huge portfolio of patents, and that's why Google is buying Motorola. They need to have access to patents to protect Android against the different lawsuits they are facing from Apple and Microsoft and other companies. So what they are basically trying to get is a portfolio of patents. And on the other hand, another interesting thing that they will be able to do with Motorola is to have a more tight integration of their software and platform with the hardware. Because when we look at other players, we see Apple performing extremely well because they can have a very good experience of their software and the iOS into the hardware. And by having access to the worldwide leading R&D team, they will be able to improve the experience and not to be so dependent on companies like Samsung and HTC to provide that integration.
So the key thing there from what you're saying is that Google now will have control. It's got its Android software, which up until now it's been relying on other companies to do the actual hardware. So is the end game here basically a Google phone? As you have an iPhone made by Apple, will people be able to go out there and buy a G phone, if you like? And will it be a real competitor to the incumbent?
Yeah, absolutely. You are totally right. They can now push even further their services on the phones, because what we are seeing from other Android manufacturers is basically taking the platform, changing and improving the look and feel to have their own differentiations, but none of them is really pushing Google services. And with what Google can do with Motorola is having a truly Google phone. A device, a smartphone that it's the state of the art, will be a premium and an improved experience with Android and totally integrated with the Google services. And this acquisition can also help Google and the Android ecosystem to enter the enterprise segment and the enterprise part of the market, because Android has not been very strong in that area, and Motorola has been developing some IT policies, some security that can improve Google.
All right, tell me your gut feeling on this one then, Francisco, on how all this is going to go down. iPhones have become mainstream, I think we can say. BlackBerries are a major business tool now, more than just a phone or an email device. Do you think Google can succeed here and that people are actually going to want to go out and buy a Google phone?
I think the main goal of Google is not to turn Motorola into the leading smartphone manufacturer in the world, because they need Samsung, they need HTC, they need our players to grow the Android installed base. At the end of the day, Google is still selling services. They are not becoming a truly consumer's electronic manufacturer. So they will use Motorola, and of course they will support Motorola. They will improve the cash that Motorola will have to develop their products, but at the end of the day they are using Motorola and not trying to get Motorola to the top, because companies like Samsung, LG, HTC, Sony Ericsson have stronger brands, and stronger brands in regions like Western Europe, like Middle East, like Asia. So they will need those partners to continue supporting the Android ecosystem.
All right then, Francisco, stay with us if you would, because we're also looking at Apple and Samsung this week, and I would like to get your views on that. Apple's taken out a bunch of lawsuits trying to stop Samsung rolling out its latest tablet computer, or should we say iPad competitor. We got hold of one though, and so decided to put it through its paces up against the iPad 2. Have a look at this. The first thing you notice is just how similar the two tablets look. The new Galaxy Tab does have a completely different design to its predecessor, but a very similar one to the iPad, hence Apple's lawsuits and injunctions. The other thing you notice is that the iPad appears a lot faster from the get-go. Its boot-up time eclipsed that of the Galaxy Tab, and that was one of the things Apple made a big deal about when it launched the iPad 2, the faster dual-core A5 processor chip. Over on the Galaxy, Google's Android Honeycomb operating system just couldn't keep up. Apple's A5 chip also delivered faster rotation. When moving from portrait to landscape, the iPad was clearly faster and more responsive. Right now, it's 2-0 to Apple. Now our tasks. First, find the Counting the Cost page online. Now here we have to point out that I've been operating an iPad for a long time. My business editor, who's operating the Galaxy Tab, has only had his hands on it for a few days. But they, or we, pretty much matched each other. In fact, the Galaxy arrived there marginally faster, perhaps thanks to some more direct navigating. Both brought up embedded YouTube videos too, which was good. Much is made of Apple's decision not to install Flash video software on the iPad, making some videos unviewable. Speaking of YouTube, both devices have built-in YouTube players, so we set ourselves the task of looking up, locating and playing a music video clip. Now again, a lot is dependent on how long you've used the device and how strong the Wi-Fi is. Just like the web search, both machines kept pace with each other. The iPad brought up my Coldplay video in good time, but it did take a while to actually start playing. In the meantime, my editor's Loop Fiasco clip got up and running just that bit quicker. So on the search functions, it seems the iPad and the Galaxy Tab are performing pretty much on par. Let's call it 2-all. And our final task, to take a photograph using the tablet's rear cameras and post it on Twitter. Now the Galaxy Tab has a built-in social hub for such tasks, while it's a third-party app I'm using on the iPad. And the ability to kit out your iPad with such apps is one of the big advantages over the Galaxy. In the end, the iPad got the picture on Twitter first. It does appear faster and more intuitive, but again, a lot of this comes down to the user and how used to the technology they are. So all up, we'll call it a draw. The iPad is clearly faster, but the Galaxy, particularly with its high-definition widescreen display, is no slouch either. Yeah, so it was an interesting matchup, and even just looking at the two devices, you could see how tight this competition is, just the way they look so similar. Before we go back to Francisco, I do want to bring in George Kafrouni in Dubai. He is the product and training manager for the GCC at Samsung Electronics, the people who gave us the tablet. George, we've put the two devices through their paces. They are not dissimilar at all. So my question is, why should I buy your product?
Okay, first of all, regarding the Galaxy Tab, it's a complete innovative device with multiple features that could bring use to the customer and to anyone in the market. Regarding that matter, regarding the specifications of the Galaxy Tab, first of all, you have the Flash support, the Flash 10.3 support, which will enable you to have full multimedia browsing and full video streaming live on the internet. This is one. Second, the innovative shape and design of the Galaxy Tab 10.1. The Galaxy Tab 10.1 is only 565 grams. It's 8.6 millimeter thick, and the screen is 10.1 inch. So actually, you could enjoy having a huge screen with a very slim design and a lightweight. Thirdly, we can talk about the Reader's Hub, which is available as well as many hubs inside the device. So Reader's Hub could allow you to view around 2.2 million ebooks, all your favorite newspapers selected by the country you choose, and more than 2,300 magazines, all available online for you to enjoy.
But even with these apparent innovations, do you feel you're actually making inroads in this market, that you're actually getting people to go and buy a Galaxy over an iPad? Because in the end, I mean, I know I use it, but the iPad is considered the benchmark. Do you feel you can challenge them?
Actually, the recent figures about the tablet market for Samsung, and regarding this is only regarding GCC. In GCC, we have sold around 1 million tablets. Okay, so the tablet industry is very growing, and it keeps growing constantly with the growing technologies. So those 1 million tablets that we have sold last year, we've had a market share for mobility of 16%, while we are expecting to raise our market share mobility for 22% by September this year.
All right, George Kafrouni there from Samsung in Dubai. Thank you for that. We're going to go back to London now. Our tech analyst for the week, Francisco Geronimo. iPad and Galaxy, they are very similar. And certainly Apple thinks so, to the point of taking out injunctions to stop Samsung selling the Galaxy in Europe and Australia. Has it got legal grounds for these complaints, do you think?
Yeah, that's correct. They look very similar products, but at the end of the day, nowadays, smartphones, they all look alike, and then tablets all look alike. They basically have different screen sizes, but they are very, very similar in terms of the hardware, in terms of the design, but also in terms of the user interface and the experience. When we look at the iPad and the Galaxy Tab, they have very similar form factors and very similar designs. And of course, what everyone in the industry is trying to do is to replicate the Apple's iPad and the Apple's iPhone. Everyone wants to have the devices that can look the same as Apple products. And this is a threat for Apple, because they lead the tablets market with a huge market share. They will continue leading that market for years to come, but they need to protect themselves, because what happened, and when we look at the iPhone, for instance, it took quite a while, and 3-4 years, to companies like Samsung and HTC and others to have a device that truly competes with the iPhone. And what happened with tablets is that a few months later, several companies launched tablets to compete with the first iPad. And the second iPad, it happened the same. And with Android gaining ground and getting stronger on the smartphones, will be a threat on the tablets market as well for Apple, because the response from most competitors is a lot faster in this segment than it was when Apple first launched the iPhone. So Apple will try by all means to protect the segment, because it's a very lucrative segment. And
But
it's a
isn't
segment
Apple-
that is exploding.
Sorry to interrupt you, Francisco. Isn't Apple almost playing the bully boy here, bullying its competition around? It can't lay claim to the tablet market in the way it is, because the idea for tablet computers came about years ago. Yes, they were a lot bigger and more clunky then, but Apple almost seems to be saying now, no, we made the iPad first, so we can dictate play in this market.
Yeah, absolutely. They are trying to be bully, and they want to, and they need to protect the segment and their business, because Android is the #1 on the smartphones, will become the #1 on the tablets segment as well. And even if they are the leading company on the tablets, the operating system will dominate, the Android operating system will dominate the market, and that's why they have to be very protective, and they have to fight as much as they can to protect their design and their unique selling points, which is the software and which is their design.
All right, Francisco Geronimo there on a big week in the technology world for us. Thank you, Francisco. Right, only actually one other thing to look at on this week's show, and that is, of course, Europe. The angle this week, though, is a place not in any debt trouble, but one still affected by it. Because as the uncertainty continues, investors are looking to safe havens, such as the Swiss franc. The currency is now much stronger as a result, and that in turn is hurting Swiss exporters. Have a look at this now from Nick Spicer in Uetlingen in Switzerland.
The cows couldn't care, but the skyrocketing Swiss franc has this dairy farmer worried. He has to sell their milk to people like this man. And cheesemaker Christophe Hess pays less for milk because he's had to cut prices on the cheese he sells overseas.
The problem is that the Swiss franc is that strong, so for some people it becomes too expensive, and there are some other Emmental cheese on the market. They are produced not in Switzerland, they are cheaper.
And other Swiss exporters are hurting. Producers of metals, industrial equipment, and chemicals. As for Emmental cheese sales, they dropped 17% in the first half of the year.
To panicked global investors, the Swiss economy feels a bit like the country of Switzerland through history. A safe haven. High economic growth, low public debt, and unemployment have all made the Swiss franc feel like a safe bet. But when everybody feels that way, the Swiss franc costs more against other currencies.
And while that may be good for investors, it's not always good for Switzerland.
If you are buying Swiss francs, you are buying some share of the Swiss economy, but the Swiss economy has to live, and the Swiss franc can rise in price, but the Swiss economy have to live with this higher value.
Some of this cheese will age for 3 years before hitting the market. By then, Rez hopes the franc will have dropped in value. But a handful of suppliers have given up, with 3 cheesemakers already closing their doors. Just being made in Switzerland isn't enough to win global consumers when the Swiss franc, and therefore Swiss cheese, cost so much.
Which leads us to ask what can be done. Miles Bradshaw will have some answers for us. He's Senior Vice President at the world's biggest bonds trader, PIMCO. Miles, what can the Swiss government do? What can the Swiss National Bank do? As I understood, it was looking at pegging to the euro. Is that still a possibility?
I don't think that's the solution. I mean, let's first find out what the problem is. And the problem is that there is a crisis going on the Swiss franc benefits from a flight to safety. In a normal environment, what would happen is you'd cut interest rates. Now, the problem is in Switzerland, interest rates are floored at zero. So the first thing the Swiss bank did was intervene in the foreign exchange markets. They sold Swiss franc, they bought euros, and now about 80% of their balance sheet consists of foreign currency assets. The problem with that is that as the Swiss franc appreciates and the euro falls, they make losses. That creates political problems because the regional governments in Switzerland usually receive a dividend from the Swiss National Bank, and instead, they're not receiving that dividend, they're now having to put capital payments into the Swiss National Bank. So that was the first thing that fell. And the solution now that was announced this week is that the Swiss bank will basically be using foreign exchange swaps. Now, the problem is that they have to do a lot to really overwhelm the market. The amounts they're doing, 200 billion Swiss francs, is not that much. And the negative implied interest rates that are in the curve are not that much. So they need to do a lot more. And the truth is that globally, really, we're at the envelope of what policy can do to achieve certain outcomes. And it's a global problem. We've seen the problems in Brazil, where they've imposed taxes. In Switzerland, because of the role of Switzerland as an international financial centre, those things are much more difficult.
Okay then, Miles, let's widen things out to what's happened in the Eurozone this week. Few signs of leadership, finally, from France and Germany, talking about this idea, which we actually talked about on this show last week, I'd like to say, a central fiscal government or union or bond or whatever you want to term it. Do you think there's enough support in the Eurozone for it?
This has been discussed in Europe for at least 12 to, I'm trying to think when the crisis goes back, at least 18 months. And the issue really is about creating fiscal union, having a common funding instrument such as a common bond needs to occur alongside fiscal integration. And that means that if Germany is to guarantee debt issued by Italy, Germany has to have some greater confidence that Italy will implement the correct fiscal policies to ensure sustainable public finances. And what Merkel and Sarkozy basically said this week on Tuesday is that they want to see those steps to fiscal integration taking place before you have a common bond. And therefore the common bond will not be a solution to the crisis in terms of the next 3 to 6 months, or at least not yet, but will come at the end of the process. What do I think about the possibility of this being agreed across Europe? Well, all the measures they want have been discussed for the last 6 to 12 months in Europe. We had something similar in March when we had Merkel and Sarkozy setting a competitiveness pact for Europe. And the simple answer is it's going to be very difficult to get these things agreed in Europe. Things like the financial transaction tax needs to be applied across the EU. The UK is not going to support that. The Austrians don't want to surrender their fiscal sovereignty. The Italians will be more willing, since and the Spanish, since they stand to benefit, but countries such as Netherlands as well will not want to surrender their sovereignty. So it's going to be a very complicated political dialogue, as is usual in Europe. That's the way the European institutions have always evolved for the past 50 years.
You mentioned Germany at the start of that answer. And really, Germany is critical to how the Eurozone moves forward. It dictates a lot of the play. And then you see there was this really bad quarter in Germany, flat growth across the second quarter, which makes you wonder if Germany is in such a position still to dictate anymore.
The reason Germany can dictate, as you put it, I mean, the fact is they can't quite dictate. They can set the political agenda, but they can't tell the Austrians and indeed the Spanish exactly what to do. But the reason they can do that is because one of their size and strength of their balance sheet. You know, they are the core of the European Union, the core of the Eurozone. They're the funding master for the EU. They have public finances, although their debt level is in the order of 85%. They have a fiscal deficit has done better than expected. Their economy has been the strongest economy in Europe, and that has been leading the European economy. So the fact that they slow inevitably means that we're going to see a slowdown across Europe. It's unlikely that it's going to be Germany in isolation. So Germany slowing isn't such, as so to speak, a negative just for Germany, it's a negative for the whole Eurozone. And really it puts greater pressure on public finances across the Eurozone, particularly in Italy and Spain, and then also in France, where because growth will be weaker than expected, the fiscal deficits will be higher than expected, additional measures will have to be announced in due course. So growth slowing is a problem for Europe. It's not just a problem for Germany.
All right, Miles Bradshaw at PIMCO there in London, talking the latest in Europe. Thank you, Miles, for that.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
And that is where we'll leave you this week, but with a reminder, of course, to check us out online. If you start from the main page at aljazeera.net/English, hit the business tab at the top, link on to the CTC page. You'll find all our episodes up there in full for you to catch up on. And then you can hop on Twitter to get in touch. At KamalAJE is where you'll find me for updates on this show and a chance to tell us what you'd like to see in a future show, perhaps. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.